welcoming everybody on behalf of the Former Members of Congress Association, which has put this program together. They do a remarkable job of trying to bring former members together and educate for the current crop of Congress, as well as the country as a whole. So I applaud the former members of Congress. So we have four distinguished leaders of the Congress. I'm not going to introduce them in great depth today, but we're going to have an open discussion about agriculture, food, and farm policy, and anything that relates to that. So it can be up to each of you to decide how to do it. I would introduce just Senator Saxby Chambliss, represented the 8th Congressional District in Georgia. He was a senator. He served on the House and Senate Ag Committee. He was chairman of the Senate Ag Committees and also served as ranking member, and he's currently a partner at DLA Piper. Senator Heidi Heitkamp represented North Dakota in the United States Senate. She was also the state's attorney general and tax commissioner of North Dakota. And while in the Senate, she served on the Agriculture Committee, helping draft two of the most recent farm bills. She serves as the director of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, which is a great opportunity for her to continue her work. I know she's been very involved in rural issues most generally, and she's also a frequent contributor on television, which I'm very jealous of. So glad to have you here. We have Congressman Mike Conaway from Texas, the 11th Congressional District, a big swath of West Texas. He served on the House Ag Committee for his entire time in Congress, and he was chairman of the committee from 2015 to 2019, was also a ranking member, and worked with our final guest, Congressman Colin Peterson, on ag policy while he was in Congress, and he retired in 2021. And then last but not least is my friend Colin Peterson, who served in Congress for 30 years from Minnesota's 7th Congressional District. He served on the House Ag Committee in terms of 2 stints as House Ag Committee chairman, also as ranking member. He was a chief author of the last farm bill, as was, of course, Congressman Conaway. Has dedicated his life to food, farm, and ag issues, and currently he runs the Peterson Group, where he specializes in farm advocacy policy. So I'm going to just open it up with a general question, and not so much a process question, but a policy question. As you look at this farm bill this year, what do you think are the one or two things that just need to be part of this, that either are the same or differentiate themselves from what we've done in the past? And just a couple minutes each, just kind of talk about what would you think the priorities ought to be. So I'm first going to call on Saxby Chambliss, then I'll go to Heidi, and then I'll go to Mike, and then I'll go to Colin. So Saxby.
Well, thank you, Dan, and good morning to everybody, or some of you. I guess it's the evening, but it's a pleasure to get together with all of these four folks because beginning with Dan, when he was secretary, I was a member of the House Ag Committee, and we worked very closely together. And now we have collaborated on any number of issues post House and Senate days and post his days as the Ag Committee, Ag Chairman, Secretary. And Heidi and Colin and Mike have been my longtime dear friends and running mates. And Colin and I were, we came from different parties, but when it came to farm bills, he and I always were locked at the hip, and we had some pretty good battles together there. You know, our farm bills obviously are always difficult for any number of issues. The number one issue that always concerns members of the committee is the budget. How much money they're going to have to spread around to the limited programs. This year, I'm told that the budget number, the baseline number, is going to be 1.5 trillion, and 1.2 trillion of that is allocated to the SNAP program. So these are 10-year numbers, even though we have 5-year farm bills. So the number that the committees are going to have to deal with is pretty minimal relative to the number of programs that are out there. I do think there are a couple of things that are probably going to be highlighted. I don't know how much money can allocate it to the climate change issue. Heidi and I have been involved in a study with the bipartisan council on agriculture's participation in the issue of climate change, and it is an opportunity if we're going to move forward on that issue. There's a really opportunity for farmers and ranchers around the country to have an additional income stream, and I think that will be some part of the debate this time, more so than what they had 5 years ago. I do think another issue that I'm not sure how they can address it, but there are a lot of foreign investment being made into agricultural land around the country, particularly China. And China is everybody's whipping boy right now for all the right reasons. So I know that the Chinese are heavily investing into agricultural land. So I think that that'll be a discussion. I'm not sure how exactly what the role of the Farm Bill can be in that issue, but I do know that it's going to be certainly brought up and discussed.
Great. And I might add that if we have time, we're going to have time for a few audience questions. So if people have questions, they should put it in the Q&A section on the bottom of their computer. So we'll get to that. So Heidi, I'm going to call on you next to kind of give your thoughts.
Well, I want to reiterate what Saxby said about the role of climate, but I also want to put this in the context of the investments that were made on the agricultural side in the IRA. And I think that there's going to be, a discussion about how do you integrate those in a long-term kind of farm bill, not just standalone IRA. By that, I mean the Inflation Reduction Act, which added additional money to the EQIP program, for instance, that actually is overprescribed, meaning that there's more people who want to do that conservation program than there were resources for. So I think when you look at also the fuel side, there's going to be a lot of dialogue and debate about what happens with agricultural, with fuels that are ag-based, whether it's biodiesel, whether it's aviation fuel, a lot of movement there, a lot of investment, again, in the IRA in aviation fuel, which would be generated from agricultural products. But I want to kind of raise maybe some side issues that have not played a big role in the past in a farm bill and in farm bill negotiation. And I raise these issues because I look at the membership of the committee. And probably the one thing that you should all pay attention to is the fact that Warnock, a former and now senator from the great state of Georgia, and Cory Booker from New Jersey are both on the Ag Committee, and they both have been very clear about the role that reversing past discrimination, providing greater incentives for minority populations or underserved, I guess now we're calling them, underrepresented populations to play a role in the Farm Bill. And so even though that probably is not a big dollar amount, it becomes a big philosophical hurdle that you're that you may see play out in moving the Farm Bill forward. Obviously, SNAP, we're kind of ignoring that, but work requirements on SNAP are going to be very hard fought. Any kind of reduction to food security, when you look at the membership of the House Ag Committee and also the Senate Ag Committee, and then writ large, the majority populations, it's interesting because I always tell Colin, what percentage of the House of Representatives actually has a farmer in their district, because we know every senator has a farmer that they represent, but not every district does. And the final thing I would say to pay attention to is what is going to be the risk mitigation for specialty crops. As we look at smaller stakeholder farmers, and we see more smaller units producing fruits, nuts, organics, they're going to play a pretty big size role, especially on the Democratic side, in evaluating and moving the Farm Bill forward. And so I would just say that, you know, we're used to the fights about crop insurance. We're used to the fights about conservation title and restrictions on wetlands or whatever it is. We've come to understand some of the challenges in the rural development area, but we're going to see new challenges emerge and new coalitions formed that will restrict the ability to get a farm bill done unless those things are paid attention to. And I want to raise the issue of global hunger. I think it's been in the past a bipartisan issue, but it's something that I think as we look at what's happened in Ukraine and Russia, the international food security issues, I think, need to be addressed. Whether that's going to be a political priority for anyone is yet questionable. And again, it's great to be here with these amazing giants of Congress who have forgotten more about a farm bill than most people have ever known.
Well, you're a giant too. I want to make sure that's clear. And one thing I would add just to what you said is, I was on the Ag Committee in the House in the 1970s, and the committee was largely, almost entirely focused on rural members. And as you said, there's a lot more diversity of all types, particularly urban members on both House and Senate Ag committees. And a lot of people who were not so interested in agriculture 40 or 50 years ago have become interested. So it's a more complicated political process than it might have been in the early days. Mike, I'm going to turn to you for your thoughts.
Well, thanks, Dan. Following two thoughtful senators' conversation, it's like trying to share a hamburger with a lion. You should have gotten your bite first. I would add that Senator Stabenow is not running for. And so I'm pretty confident she's going to be really motivated to get a farm bill done, perhaps not this year, this calendar year, but certainly before she leaves the Senate. And so don't lose sight of the fact that she's going to really work hard to get a farm bill done. I do think the SNAP conversation needs to happen. We tried really hard in 2018 to get some stuff done. One quick example, unemployment rate in California is 4.8% in February. The farm bill, the SNAP provisions provide that you can waive the work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents for areas where the unemployment rate exceeds 10%. California has a statewide waiver for the work requirements. Of the 58 counties in California, only 5 of them have unemployment in excess of 10%. So this really needs to be addressed. It's not so much the fault of the states. If I'm a governor and I can game the system to get more food stamp dollars coming into my state, I'm certainly going to do that. That's manna from heaven, because I'm not responsible for raising those dollars. I'm just responsible for my folks spending those dollars. And so it's a federal policy issue that needs to be addressed. During the conversation, the 18 Farm Bill, my Senate colleagues argued that the Secretary had the authority to tighten up the sufficient jobs arena, which is where this is getting gamed. And then we didn't need to address it in the Farm Bill. And so we didn't. And it has not been addressed because I don't think necessarily the Secretary has that conversation. So the work requirements for ABODs will be a conversation. I do think that the budget issue that Saxby mentioned is about $875 billion in programs that expire without baseline. Those folks are currently funded and they're going to expect to be funded again. So that's another hole that the 4 principals are going to have and their staffs are going to have to come up with. But it will be interesting to see how those 4 get along and how they work together to try to get something done that's really important to our country.
Thank you. And Colin, your cleanup thoughts on all of this.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you guys for being here. Good to see you. I've been talking to the principals, the big 4 that are going to be involved in this farm bill, and they're all saying the right thing. They're all they say committed to getting this done. But I think this is going to be a significant challenge, as it always has been, and it might be even more this time. So one of the things people are focused on is trying to get more money in the farm bill somehow or another, I don't know, through the budget process or whatever, to try to deal with some of these issues like Heidi brought up or other issues. I would just caution people, if you remember back to 2007, and Saxby, you were there, you were in the Senate at that time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So John Spratt, bless his heart, was going to do me a favor. And so he, without talking to me, he added $10 billion into the budget resolution for the Ag Committee. And he did not talk to me about it, you know, and he also did not designate how it was going to be raised. So it did not designate whether it was going to be cuts in the budget or revenue. And what that did is it put the power of that farm bill in the Finance Committee in the Senate, basically. And that was not a good situation. So I would just caution people, first of all, if you're, you know, think that somehow or another you're going to get more money, which I think is going to be tough. But if you do, you better designate where it's going to come from, you know, and get that resolved ahead of time. You're just going to put another complication into the whole situation, you know. So, you know, I've been, you know, helping people with that, but I just think it's got to be decided where it's going to come from. And I don't know how they're going to get it done. I don't think there's going to be a budget that's going to get accomplished from what I'm hearing. So there's just a lot of challenges. I think what the four of us could do, and others, Dan, you, we could be helpful in trying to figure out how to help these guys take the edges off of all of this stuff and get around the partisanship. But you know, it's going to be the same fights we've had the last 3 times. It's going to be SNAP. Nutrition is going to be a big stumbling block with the Democrats, and I don't think that's changed. I spent quite a bit of time with Senator Stabenow a couple of weeks ago, and she is not entertaining, I think, any just changes in nutrition. Mike, you know, she hasn't changed from where she was in the last farm bill, and you know, I didn't sound like she was wanting to do that. So it's kind of unclear where Boozman is at this point. They have not made a deal like Roberts made with her last time, which became almost insurmountable. But you know, you're right about the waivers. You know, and if you go back, and I was in the room with Clinton and the Blue Dogs in 1996 when we put work requirements on welfare and food stamps. And you know, and the Democrats did that. It was the Blue Dogs and Clinton that did that. But the problem was, to get the bill through the Senate, we had to give these waiver authorities to the governors, you know, and to the department and so forth. And that's where this came from. That's not something we wanted to do, but we did to get it through. And you know, you got states where the whole state, Illinois, New York, California, 100% waiver, you know, so there's no question that there's issues there, but I'm not sure the Democrats are willing to do anything about it. We'll see. So there's a lot of it.
One real quick one on that, Colin. In the 18 Farm Bill, Pat Roberts was the chair, and Senator Stabenow was the ranking member, office had veto of everything. Those roles were, she's now the chair, and John Boozman will have the veto authority on everything. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. For the,
yeah, no, there's so many obstacles. You know, at the end of the day, I think it's hard for me to see how they get a farm bill done by September 30th.
Yeah,
But God bless them if they can.
yeah, and if I can just
Go ahead.
speak from the standpoint of you know, kind of representing the Democratic Party, you know, whether Debbie can negotiate something is one thing, and whether she's willing to do that. But let me tell you, you've got a hardcore caucus. I mean, Gillibrand's on agriculture. She's been very resistant to changing anything with food security. In fact, I think there's going to be a big push to pushing Debbie to actually add additional resources and change some standards. So not only, Mike, well, you guys be unhappy with status quo, there may be a movement to move it the other direction. So I think Debbie's going to have to navigate that water in the caucus, understanding that compromises may, given if you're going to get it done, you obviously are going to have a dialogue with the other party over in the House of Representatives that's going to control the narrative there.
So to follow up, I just, because I need to move this along to get a bunch of questions in. And then you can add as you like. You know, the Farm Bill, when I was back in Congress, was really the Farm Bill, and then the SNAP was added. But if you look at this bill, there's farm programs, risk management, conservation, climate, federal feeding programs, research at the massive research budget, global food assistance, energy, even antitrust, which is not necessarily directly in the jurisdiction, but it's there. So this has become much broader than a farm bill. This is a food, supply, energy, climate, agriculture bill all combined into one. So it's just got so much bigger scope than it might have had 40 years ago. So my question to you all is, you think you'll be able to put together the same kind of bipartisan consensus on a bill in the modern era that we were able to do in decades and years past?
I think that issue is going to be really, really difficult, Dan, particularly on the House side. Colin, you and Mike know that y'all had a tough time in 18. And now with Mike, our Republican colleagues taking over the House, there's a strong faction and within the Republican conference that they don't like these types of farm programs. And we battle that, Colin. You remember back in 95, 96, boy, it was tough back in those years.
Freedom and farm.
Yeah, that's right. That was a bad idea, but the makeup is significantly different than what you guys had to deal with in 2018. And Dan, that point of can we really get a consensus in both the House and the Senate? It is going to be really, really tricky.
Any other thoughts on that?
One historical point, the Farm Bill passed in the House version with a landslide of 213 to 211. The conference report though passed with 369 votes. And so it's, it can get it through, just getting it through the House, and when you get to conference and move forward. I do think that the House calendar for 23 is going to be more difficult than in 18 because there's a commitment to handle all 12 appropriations bills separately. And the time is going to get short. So I would expect a extension of the 18 Farm Bill for at least a year to get it into 24 so that you can get it done then. But I would be surprised if they get it done in calendar 23.
I want to just
Heidi?
just add we're going to hear again, let's take all of those programs out and just pass a farm bill. I've never been a proponent of that because I think, again, you go back to who represents agriculture and rural America. And as Saxby was talking about and Mike was talking about the kind of knives on the conservative side being out for the farm bill. Let me tell you, if you're a downtown Manhattan representative that wants to show some fiscal conservative cred, farm bill is where you go. And so this coalition has been critical to actually passing a farm bill, but it creates complexities that make it difficult.
I just would say that I've been telling people, and I don't know what you do about this, but the biggest problem we have in agriculture is that we have no Democrats in farm districts. None, basically. And you can't do a farm bill with one party. I don't believe, I just don't think that's possible. And I don't think if you were able to get it done, it would not stick. So somehow or another, they got to figure out a way to make this work on a bipartisan basis when you're dealing in the House with hardly anybody that has a farm district on the Democratic side.
So Colin, you raised the question. I got to ask you, why are there no Democrats in farm districts?
I think it's guns and abortion and Donald Trump. That's what I think.
Heidi, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, sure. I mean, probably if you look at Colin and I, we were the last two standing that represented really rural and had kind of the commitment. And now and it's one of the reasons why I think that being one party, no matter what interest group you represent is always bad. And so I think it's going to require a lot of heavy lifting from people who understand the importance of the Farm Bill as an economic measure for this country, but also the importance of food security moving forward. But again, these are tough political times, getting people in rural, in urban America to understand why we need to spend money on crop insurance.
And in Minnesota is a good example. So we now have in Minnesota, the legislature controlled by the Democrats in both the House and the Senate. And that is completely controlled by the Twin Cities and the suburbs. There's nobody in the rural part of Minnesota, the farm country, that's there on the Democratic side. And so they're going way off in a tangent. And so part of the reason you can't elect anybody is that the Democrats are going off in a direction that is not supported by people in rural districts. And it's very evident when you look, at one time, it was kind of confused, but now it's not confused. They're very, and then they've got all these things that they've come up with. I mean, all the money they've spent, on the IRA and climate change and taking money out of the CCC, and all of this stuff is coming home to roost, frankly.
Well, as somebody once said, demographics is everything. And unfortunately, the demographics of rural America is kind of deteriorating in terms of population. That's one of the reasons why a bipartisan consensus is so critical to protect the interests of rural America, because there's just not enough people in rural America to control that, as there might have been 40, 50, 60 years ago. And if it weren't for the United States Senate, it would be a much more serious problem than it is. So let me ask you this question.
We do
Go
have
ahead,
Sanford
Seth.
still there though, Kylan.
Oh, no, I know. Yeah, Sanford.
He will be important.
Yeah, I understand. And Benny Thompson, and so we have some members that are in farm districts, but they're not your traditional, they're not the Heidi Heitkamp, Colin Petersons, and Sanford's a good friend of mine, and Benny's a good friend of mine, so, but they're outnumbered. If you look at that ag committee in the House, and they're good people, but they put 11 new members on. One of the problems we've had in the House, you can't get people to stay on the ag committee. There's only 9 of them on the Democratic side that actually are permanent members, and the rest are temporary. So nobody's building seniority. And what happens, they're a term or two, and then they're off to Ways and Means or Energy and Commerce or whatever, and it's a big problem.
So let me just switch for a second. I want to go to something that Tom Vilsack, Secretary Vilsack, has been talking about. When asked about the farm economy, in some parts, the farm economy is excellent. It's very good, notwithstanding high input costs. I mean, we've had, pretty good commodity prices over the years. But he says is that the problem is that it's not shared across the board with respect to all farmers in this country. He says big farmers of scale have done very well overall. But smaller farmers not of scale, diversified farmers, people who need 2 jobs have not done very well. And our farm programs haven't really addressed that. That is, most of our farm programs really benefit people who are larger operators. I wonder if you might comment on this as an issue, because he feels very strongly about this.
That's always an issue in every farm bill. And I will say that the 4 of us and any number of other leaders in the ag community have been trying to figure out what that silver bullet is that we can really give additional benefits to small farmers. We've had loan programs and other things that have worked, but still they really haven't worked from the standpoint of the survivability of small farmers. And it is a very, very difficult issue to have to address.
Well, the thing is, Dan, you can't repeal economics, and frankly, you can't survive in this economy. And if we're going to be in the world market at the prices we're going to get, it does not work on a small farm. It just doesn't. And I don't think that we can fix that, and so if you're going to be in agriculture, you've got to get up to a scale that works, to where you can actually survive. So I'm not sure this is fixable by the Congress. It's more the economics that are driving this. And at the end of the day, you cannot repeal economics, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with Colin on that. I think the Farm Bill should focus on those farmers who feed us and feed the world. And those are the ones, as Colin said, it's scope. Now, maybe we can use the, modest efforts in trying to get fixing this thing, which Shapley's right. This is not particularly being successful across the bill to build those, coalitions across places to get other votes. But I agree with Colin. It's difficult. Part of it is a definition. A small farm, I think USDA still uses $1,000 of gross revenue as a farm. That's a hobby. You don't feed a family. You don't feed anybody hardly at that kind of scale. And so maybe a better definition of what we consider to be a quote unquote small or beginning farmer would be a better starting place than to try to fix somebody who's making less than $1,000 gross revenue from whatever it is they're trying to do, because you can't feed your family doing that, and you shouldn't have an expectation to do that. And so it's, but at the end of the day, the Farm Bill needs to make sure that the folks who feed us continue to be able to do that and feed the world.
If I can just say,
Sure.
that the focus may be, I mean, if you're a soybean farmer or a corn farmer, or, as I always remind Saxby, I know nothing about cotton, rice, or peanuts. But you've got to scale up. I think everybody understands that. And Sonny Perdue took the slings and arrows when he said that actually in Wisconsin, go big or get out, which probably wasn't the right kind of language to use. But I think a focus on specialty crops, a focus on kind of smaller units that can do bigger things, whether it is, apples or cherries or whatever it is, I think will begin to take some of the sting out of, look at these big operators who are getting, over 10 years, $2 million in federal subsidies. That's always going to be a sting point for the rhetoric. And Colin and I know, and all of us know, what kind of risks these same farmers are taking every year as they produce their crops. And so, this is a risk mitigation factor. Good commodity prices can take a lot of that risk out, but we can't always count on good commodity prices. So I think paying attention politically to this issue is critical. Being realistic, as Colin has said, about, what size is actually scalable. And Mike, I mean, I don't know one farmer who produces 1,000, that's unrealistic. And so they need to upgrade their definitions.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, so we need to lose the sight of the fact that starting in 2007, we made a concerted effort to try to address these issues by putting programs in place that these folks could take advantage of, and it's worked pretty well. We added value added producer grants. We supported local foods. We supported organic. We supported all these ideas that have actually been very successful and popular. And we've got a lot of folks that are in agriculture farming now at a small level that wouldn't have been there without these programs. So we have, rather than go in there and try to punish the people that are actually producing most of the food, what we took is the idea to go in there and try to support people that want to get into an agriculture a different way. In our part of the world, people can't afford, the land is so expensive, you can't afford to get into farming unless you got a family that's going to give it to you. So people are going out there and doing things where they don't need a lot of land, and some of them are very successful. So I think we need to focus on programs that will be available to people that want to approach this a different way, maybe a specialty crops, whatever it is. And that's the way to deal with this.
One thing I would just add is the Congress has, over the last several years, made the risk management and crop insurance programs much more flexible, so that you're not penalized if you want to try new things. As Heidi said, growing specialty crops on farm acreage that was previously restricted, let's say, row crop acreage, and giving people that option, I think, has made a choice, in providing the risk management coverage for that has also made a choice. The other thing I would just add, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, is our diet changing in America? There's this whole movement now of health, medicine, food, and agriculture, and what people eat. We have this massive problem with, we spend $200 billion a year in our Medicare program just to treat people with type 2 diabetes. That's way more than we spend our farm programs. How much is that attributed to what we eat? I don't know. But what I'm saying is, you may be seeing some of a dietary change in America that may affect all of this as well. So that's demand driven. That's not government driven so much. That's economic and demand
Well,
driven.
Dan, the government is trying to change the diet of people, and they're not being very successful. They're trying to change the school lunch, and it's being rejected by people. They won't eat the stuff that they're trying to get them to eat. So the government is actually trying to do this, and it's not working. So people are going to go to eat their junk food and go down to the convenience store, and this dietary council, whatever they've got that comes up with these ideas, I think some of those,
the guidelines,
those guys are, should be put out of business, I think, but.
No. All right. Well, let me move to a related subject, which is two related subjects. So Saxby mentioned before we got on the phone with the public here about foreign ownership of farmland, and whether that's a serious problem or whether that's a political problem. I wonder if any of you might have comments on that issue. The issue often focuses on China, although I think the evidence shows that the Chinese have bought some American agribusiness companies, but the amount of farmland they own is still rather small. And there are a lot of countries that own much more farmland than China does. But do you think this is a serious problem? Do you think this is going to impact the next farm bill at all?
Well, I think they'll adopt a provision that says that China can't own farmland somehow or another in the farm bill, and that's fine. I think the states are going to do that as well. I don't think it's a lot of land, but what it is, they're doing it in areas that are very sensitive, like they're trying to buy land up by the Grand Forks Air Force Base and that sort of thing. I don't know why they're doing this, but that's a big concern. But the amount of land they own is almost nothing.
Yeah, one of the interesting things is in this whole China thing is that China is by far and away the largest purchaser of U.S. agriculture commodities. Right. They dwarf number 2, number 3, and number 4.
And they bought Smithfield because the African swine fever killed all those pigs in China, and they were the way they raised pigs in China was in the backyard, and they fed them scraps, and that was most of their hog herd. And they got African swine fever, and 80% of them died. And so now what they're doing is they're trying to change their hog operation to an industrial system like the United States. And that's why they bought Smithfield, so they can learn how to do this,
But if China buys about half of our soybeans, roughly.
Right. Yeah, because they're now setting up an industrial system where before they didn't use soybeans.
So should that worry us, or should we feel that that's part of the global economy that we're dealing with? And I mean, it just there's a lot of anti-China bashing now, but I'm just curious, the relationship between U.S. farmers and ag exports is pretty high. Everybody always talks about ag exports. Well, the country that buys roughly 40% of our agriculture is on the chopping block right now. It's under the gun. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
That's why we had to do market facilitation payments when we put those tariffs on China, to try to buy peace within the farm community after they screwed up the markets. But anyway.
And one way to be that. And again, the property in the United States that is national security based and should not allow the Communist Party in China to buy is relatively small. But there are great swaths where if the CCP owned it and are dependent on the products coming off of that product, that makes them maybe less likely to do something stupid that would harm our country. So the national security issue is really the one issue that, for me, on whether China or the Communist Party can buy land here in the United States. We should not let them buy it around our military bases or other sensitive places where we don't want their mischief going on. But the more they are dependent upon us to feed themselves, I think the less likely are they to do something that would cut their nose off to spite their face.
No, what I fault China in the agriculture arena is they're not buying enough peanuts, cotton, and pecans.
Yeah.
But
Well,
but
Saxby,
back in the 70s, I remember that there was a huge influx of Germans buying particularly timberland in the Southeast. So, and they were here for several years, and then ultimately they couldn't make enough money. And that land was ultimately sold back to Americans. So this may be a more cyclical like thing, but the thing about the Chinese, they don't think in 5-year terms like farm bills. They think in terms of 30 or 40 years. And they now got, 3 billion people or something like that. And there's a reason why they are the #1 purchaser of agricultural products from the United States, because we produce the most and the best quality. So they are thinking long-term, not short-term here. So I do think there's going to be a debate on it. That there is this national security issue that will be a part of the mix. I've already had a couple of agriculture commissioners around the country to call me to ask me about what they can do in their states, because they're seeing a lot of influx of investment, particularly of the Chinese. So it'll be a state issue in addition to the debate that'll go on in the Farm Bill.
Yeah, if I can just kind of broaden this issue about land ownership generally, it's an issue that we raised in the last Farm Bill. And I think it's going to complicate farm bills in the future. I don't know that we're there yet, but in North Dakota, where we still have a lot of family farming, we only have 25% of the people who are actually producing on that land that actually own that land. Now, we still have a lot of grandpas and grandmas, we still have a lot of family members, but as we see this kind of families holding on to land and then putting them in land trusts, where the farmer has to deal with somebody who's never been a farmer, who's trying to maximize revenue, doesn't understand the cyclical nature of agriculture. These problems are going to complicate politically the Farm Bill, but also the opportunity to farm. And so land ownership has to be addressed at some point here, writ large, or a broader point. Given North Dakota's experience, which basically was value added, I think we're talking about owning farmland. I think the greater concern is one that Colin just raised, which is you buy Smithfield or you buy a soybean crushing plant. How much of that is actually exporting water, which is another big issue that I think has to be addressed. We've heard that Saudi Arabia basically is buying water when they buy our alfalfa and ship it. And so these are going to be issues that will be raised on the periphery, but are look-up issues, 20-year issues that I think need to be thought about today.
Well, I think your point about water is really important. I read somewhere that about over 70% of the water in America is used directly or indirectly to feed animals and irrigate crops. So less than 30% is used for drinking, industrial use, you name it, whatever else it is. And so this is, and of course, the whole California issue between drought and flooding is a perfectly good example of that and what they're trying to do with the Colorado River now. But I think your point about water, and that leads into the issue of research. So, we have one of the most well-developed research operations in the world here in the United States, researching on water, researching on crop utilization, researching on nutrition, research on dealing with pest and disease of crops and animals and all those kinds of things. And one worries about the fact that our research dollars have been actually going down in real terms, particularly compared to China and Brazil. And the issue of water is one that's particularly useful looking at the research side of the picture, because how can we grow crops using less water? How can we feed animals using less water? Those are huge questions for our future. Any comments on the research budgets?
It's never enough. I mean, that the research is the lifeblood of agriculture for the future. And we as a government have to continue to invest in research dollars in so many aspects of our economy. But the most important part of the Farm Bill is always research, and there's always been a bipartisan effort to ensure that we were allocating all we could for research. So we can't scrimp there for sure.
So Dan, the February CBO baseline for the Farm Bill, which won't be the one they use, but it's the most current we have, I think shows about 1.3 billion for the research title over the next 10 years. There's about 235 million of it that expires without baseline when the 23 Farm Bill expires in September. So there's that adds to the budget problems that GT and John and Debbie and David are going to have with respect to this Farm Bill and finding money for research. Because like Emily said, it's we talk a good game on how important research is, but we'll see how much funding it gets, and that's where the real commitment to research is played out. We can all talk about how wonderful it is, but we need to see how it's funded.
Yeah. So I want to ask a question about competition in agriculture. I don't know how many of you have really spoken out on the issue of anti-competitive practices in the livestock industry, the meat industry, big versus small. And, you know, this tends to be more of an issue on the Democratic side than on the Republican side. But I wonder if any of you have any thoughts about these issues. Secretary Vilsack, again, has spoken out on these things. Do we need to do anything? I'm not sure this is necessarily a farm bill issue per se, but it's an issue in certain parts of agriculture as we look at who owns what and where, particularly in the proteins and livestock world.
So we have to do no harm, Dan. A lot of these solutions that are being put out there would do more harm than they do good, because people do not understand these markets, and they're going on ideology that maybe worked 20 years ago, but is not the real world today. You know, the biggest problem we got in livestock is we don't have enough processing capacity. You know, and that showed up when we had the pandemic and we closed down these plants. I was out when they were killing hogs and hauling them off, grinding them up and putting them in compost piles. So if we're going to do something, we ought to be putting significant money into building processing, you know, for beef and hogs and these other areas. And instead of trying to mandate who owns them and how they operate and so forth. Looks like Mike's got some ideas.
Yeah, well, you know, every time the markets change, particularly in the cow-calf business, the prices go up. You don't hear a lot about this issue.
Yeah.
Prices go down. You hear a lot about this issue.
Right.
And you know, economies of scale are economies of scale. Colin said a while ago, you can run a 10,000 head a day processing plant a lot more efficiently than you can run 100 head a day processing plant. And so, you know, there are resources going into it. You know, there's been Secretary Vilsack is dedicated resources to try to build it. But you know, if you give somebody something, they may not be as good at doing it as if they earned it themselves and did it themselves. So the other thing is, every time they have these prices, we always do investigations as to where the cheating was, where the, you know, who where, when, that kind of stuff. And it's, to my knowledge, we've not seen a report yet that shows where anybody did anything that was wrong. Yes, if you're, you know, your prices go up, prices go down based on supply and demand. And you know, every time we have one of these circumstances, they do an investigation, and USDA has not come out with any kind of report that says that the processors were squeezing here, or the cow-calf guys are squeezing there. So Colin's absolutely right. Don't do any harm. It's a knee-jerk reaction in response to some heartfelt pleas from constituents who are on the wrong side of a price movement. And it happens all the time. But if you look back when cattle prices went way up in 14, I didn't have any of those cow-calf guys saying anything at all about this issue. It wasn't until it dropped significantly and went the other way that they began to argue that they were being taken advantage of.
If I can just, having kind of lived through a period of time where capturing the commodities market and cow-calf, I mean, these are not the same markets as a bushel of corn. And we're seeing more and more direct pay or direct selling, more contract selling. It's limiting kind of the commodity market in kind of animal commodities. And I think that's going to continue to be a challenge if we look at pricing what farmers are getting based on a commodity value. The one thing I would say is if I were Vilsack, I would look very closely at the kind of regulation of the moms and pops that really keeps people out of a local market. I buy all my beef from a local butcher. He buys it from the farmer, or the farmer takes it in, the rancher takes it in. That's where I get my beef. But the external costs, when we could be doing things much more efficiently with technology to help those moms and pops survive, if people want to buy their beef there, or want to buy their pork there, or want to buy their chickens. I mean, Colin and I know that the Hutterites have a very robust market in selling chickens. So I'm not convinced that we have done enough to lower the barriers of entry for mom and pop operations to participate in this work. And so, I mean, these are people who, let me tell you, no one works harder than a butcher. My mom used to do that work. I know how hard that work is. And people who are willing to do it and do it in facilities that produce good, clean food shouldn't be over-regulated. And so I would say, rather than trying to control the large market, looking at antitrust, we should also look at barriers of entry of competition. And I think they are there.
Also, what happens is when these guys start getting scaling up in these they want to start selling across state lines.
Yeah.
And you can't let that happen without some kind of regulation. It's just, that's not going to work. And you've got people out there to have bills. Massey has a bill to get, to allow somebody to sell across state lines without any kind of regulation or inspection. That's a recipe for disaster is what that is.
Yeah, Colin, I'm not suggesting that we eliminate regulation. Yeah. I'm suggesting that we eliminate stupid regulation.
Well, right. I agree.
Yeah. I think somebody else had a comment.
No, I just said we got to be careful that USDA stamp of approval allows us to sell internationally. And if we dork with that, we need to make sure we understand the impact it has on international sales, because we've always got markets that are looking for reasons to not buy US beef.
Right.
And domestically, as long as people have confidence in their meat and poultry, they will continue to buy it. And right now, by and large, people do have confidence that their product is safe and healthy and sanitary. And that's a big asset for American agriculture, certainly. Well, as we come to kind of a close, I don't know if anybody in the audience has had a question. I haven't looked. I've heard from George Allen, former senator, Eva Clayton, former House member, who've said that you were all spectacular. I want you to know that. So so do you have any closing comments about the Farm Bill likely to get passed this year or not, and what we should be really focused on as we go through the next year or two in agriculture? Let's see, Saxby,
Well, I mean, I think it's imperative that we do have a farm bill this year. The last farm bill or the current farm bill has worked really well. I commend Colin and Mike and Heidi, you were involved too. I mean, when you see prices like we see today, that is a direct result of the policies in the Farm Bill, in my opinion. But times have changed. I mean, technology over the last 5 years on the farm, as everywhere else, has changed. We know what COVID did to the input costs. That has debate. That debate needs to be addressed and talked about. So I think there are any number of critical issues on the farm that really need to be addressed and need to be done this year, hopefully.
Heidi?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get a farm bill done. We're up against the backdrop of a 2024. Just taking a look at Donald Trump, who issued his China policy, which is clearly decoupling. The only pushback he got politically on his China policy were Republicans in the House of Representatives who represent farm districts. And so, you know, you can't do a farm bill in isolation. If you could, I think you would get it done. And it's going to be up against all of the other hot button issues. But I think that one of the things that has served us so well, and you represent the three people looking below me in the Zoom, but the three people who literally did something that is not always popular in Washington, D.C. They compromised. And so one thing that I tell my farmers when they ask me, I say, stay in your lane. You may have an opinion about whether somebody should get loan forgiveness for past discrimination. You will take on more water on your boat than you need to. And so my advice is, if you're going to get a farm bill done, you better come with the willingness to compromise, but also stay in your lane and leave your ideology aside and think about economically what you need to be successful in the next 5 years for your industry.
Good advice for our government generally. Let's see, Mike.
Well, real quickly, 2018, we introduced the Farm Bill in the House in March, I think, finally passed in June, and then the conference report December. We've spent 3 years getting ready for that. The current committee in the House is still doing listening sessions. They've not introduced a bill yet. As I mentioned earlier, they're committed to doing all 12 appropriate bills with open rules to the summer and on into it. So my money would be on a 24 farm bill versus a 23, just because of the mechanics of what's happening with the change in parties between the Republicans and Democrats that happened this time. That didn't happen with Farm Bill 18. And so I'd put more money on the 24 farm bill than a 23 farm bill.
And Colin?
Well, I think that right now it's looking like an extension, at least a 1-year extension will be the outcome at this point. What I question is, in 24, you're going to be in the middle of an election year. So I wonder if you're going to get a bill in 24 either. So you could end up with another year extension in 24, and you could end up with the 25 farm bill. So it kind of depends on what part of the country you're from in terms of the the ag stuff. So a lot of the folks on the Democratic side, they're going to want to protect the SNAP program. Some of them want more money, but if they got what they have now and they don't change that too much, that will be okay with them. In our part of the world here, with the prices that we have with corn and soybeans and wheat and livestock, not pork so much, but cattle, our farmers, they'd like some things, but frankly, they could live with what we got. There's not a big, huge rush to have a change. Now you've got other parts of the country that have problems. Rice has got a problem. Their price of their product didn't go up. Their imports actually went up more than other areas. And so they've been pushing for a reference price increase and some other things to try to get their industry stabilized, because they're losing farmers and losing acres. I know cotton is maybe looking for something as well to help stabilize what they've got going, and peanuts. So at the end of the day, I just don't think there's going to be enough pressure, enough people panicked about this to actually force them to get a bill done. But they're all saying the right things. And I'm going to help them, and I'm sure you guys are going to help them. And I think our role can be to try to take the partisanship off of this, try to help them find a place in the middle of the road. There's not dead skunks or armadillos, but some sensible middle of the road.
Well, I would say that as usual, you four folks have great judgment, good common sense, and continue to be helpful to have a constructive role for not only agriculture and food policy, but to keep our government functioning and on the straight and narrow, so we can continue to have a strong country as well. So thank you for your participation. Thanks again to the former members of Congress Association for sponsoring that. And with that, have a great day, great weekend, and good luck to everybody next week as well. So thanks a lot so much.
All right. Thank you, guys.